profits, unlock your potential show on the International Business Growth Radio Network. Folks, I am Jason Wally Waldron, your host for today's show, and I want to remind you that you can always go to exitology.com if you're curious about diving deeper into any of these concepts. There is a button there that allows you to join us for an executive briefing, and the executive briefing is a very small, intimate setting, 60 minutes, where we will answer any question one-on-one with you and take you through our Exitology Grow to Exit model. And before we get back to that, we are joined here today by the author, Ben Guttmann, the author of Simply Put, Why Clear Messages Win and How to Design Them. And Ben, thank you for being here again. I'm going to recap what we've talked about so far, and then I am really excited for what you're about to share with us, because we talked about there's this fundamental breakdown in communications, first of all. And you talked about the idea of fluency, which is, is the communicator and their communication message actually being received and taken in by people? And then we talked about all of these mistakes that communicators make. And, we covered so much, you're going to have to go back and listen to it if you don't remember what we talked about. And so, but the bottom line is there is a lot of miscommunication happening, and you've delved into this very deeply. And so I want you to take us through, what do we actually do to solve these problems? How do we solve communications? How do we communicate more effectively? Walk us through some things.
Oh, yeah. So, the last time we were chatting, we talked about benefits a lot, right? So that actually is the first of 5 different design principles that I've identified to help us bridge that gap, right? Senders want to say things one way, receivers want to say things another way, and we have this hole in the middle. And so how do we fix that? It's about intentional design of our communications. The first one is benefits. What does it matter to the receiver? What's in it for them, right? Number 2 is focused. Are you trying to say one thing or multiple things at once? Is it one idea, or is it 3 ideas in a trench coat? Number 3 is salient. Does your message stand out from the noise? Does it stick out? Does it contrast? Does it zig when others zag? 4th is empathetic. Are you speaking in a language that the audience understands? Are you meeting them where they are, both in terms of language, in terms of their emotions, their motivations? And the last one is minimal. Have you cut out everything that isn't important? Is it everything you need, but only what you need in order to get your point across? And it's not a checklist, it's not a rubric, it's not a step-by-step plan. These are just design principles that the more we can activate on them, the closer we're going to get between those 2 parts.
So what I love about this is, I could go out into the marketplace and there's, I could find 10 direct response copywriters who could, here's what you want to do once you understand the benefits and the features. Or, I could go out there and find a bunch of, for instance, UX, UI guys, and they could say, well, people go through here on this customer journey, then X, Y, and Z. But you've really backed this out and come up 2 or 3 levels. And that's what I like about it. First of all, right, it's not a rubric. It's not a checklist. These are principles, which implies first understanding. And so can you maybe walk us through, and folks, you want to look into Ben because he's now moved on to education, and we're going to talk here in a minute about how he actually sold his marketing agency. But, these are principles that you put into place for big names that everybody knows. I Love New York, NFL, Nature Conservancy. I mean, the list goes on. And so my point in sharing this is you've arrived at something that people can use really forever if they choose to go on this journey. But walk us through how did you actually use this when you were in industry?
Oh yeah. So, I don't, I don't like to dwell too much on kind of like in particular case studies, but it is something that every client would go through and have the same problems, which is they know their stuff. They have great products, great ideas, great books they've worked on themselves, and they have a hard time getting it out there because oftentimes they're very close to it. They know their stuff. They know the language around it. They know they know why they care about it, but they have a hard time kind of translating that outside of their walls. When I talk about empathy, I lead that chapter. But I call that empathy welcoming the enlightened idiot, right? Bringing in somebody who who is the stand-in for your audience. If it's testing your message, if it's even just kind of talking to the mirror sometimes, that helps you get out of your own bubble. I talk about, there's an episode of Star Trek where they encounter the species who they only speak in allegories. They only speak in stories from their own culture. And Captain Picard has a hard time understanding it. There's a whole episode, and they almost go blow each other up. And eventually, they realize, okay, their language is based on their own stories. We have to speak in a language based on stories and create common ones that we can connect with each other. It's great television, but it's also a great kind of metaphor for what happens a lot in business.
So much there, because oftentimes the businesses that we often work with are second or third generation owned, so and they're very liminal. And how they got here oftentimes is, hey, this guy's dad bought from this guy's dad, and then this guy's son bought from this guy's son, and we have this really amazing concrete floor. It's patented. That's how we know it's awesome, and da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And as the marketplace is rapidly changing, there's no successor on the inside of the business on the one hand, and also because of the demographic tidal wave and shift that's happening, all of a sudden, all the people who were buying from each other and had all this like coded language and multi-generational stuff, it doesn't exist anymore. And so you have this twofold situation, speaking to what you're talking about, where you never had to learn how to communicate to the marketplace, first of all, how great your stuff is. And it's truly great. These are businesses that have been around for hundreds of years sometimes. And at the same time, your success or failure over the next 10 years depends on it. Basically, your entire family wealth depends on this. And I can't put too much of an emphasis on this, because if you can step back and communicate to the emerging marketplace, the people who will be search engineing, looking for you on the search engineing, searching for you, and the people who are going to be fact finding around your messaging, if you can communicate that, that's the difference between multi-million-dollar company growth and value versus probably going out of business. And so with that, I love what you're sharing. And it's a Star Trek reference always goes well on this show, because it's just it's hilarious, because Star Trek is such a great example of unpacking humanity through the allegories of interacting with aliens. And isn't that kind of what we're trying to do all day long, anyways, with each other?
Oh yeah, and there were two references in the book that I was very happy I could get them in, and I hopefully they don't feel like they're shoehorned in, but because they also worked really well. It was the Star Trek one, and then I had to reference Bruce Springsteen as part of things too. So I referenced him twice in the previous chapter where I talk about. Number one is that democracy doesn't work in a rock band, right? Like sometimes you need to have editorial control in order to get to a focused idea. And then the other part of that is, he says at the beginning of some of his acts, nobody wins unless everybody wins. Well, that's, talking largely about social justice, but in the corporate context, nobody wins unless everybody wins. You're not going to win that contract unless you can also make the decision maker look good to their stakeholders. That's just as important as you doing a good job, as making sure that everybody that's around you benefits as well.
Well, so here's why I really love where you're coming at with these different principles. Literally 2 weeks ago at lunch, I was sitting there and we were talking to a business who at one point was in its glory, hit some rough times the last few years because of COVID and some other marketplace shifts. And we were talking about how there's always this triangle of tension, because shareholders, of course, are going to want you to charge as much as you possibly can for what you're selling. On the other hand, the consumer is going to want you to charge for as little as you possibly can to get this product. And then the people working there are going to want to be, the shareholders want to pay them as little as possible, but at the same time, they want to charge as much as possible so they can get paid more. And my point of sharing that is those are all constraints. And you have a saying that I think you ought to share here around that. What do constraints
I say that constraints breed creativity, right?
I love that.
When I talk about saliency, well, saliency is doing something different, right? So that it rises to the attention. How do you create something different? Well, it's by following rules that are different and following a process that's different than everybody else. And the best way to achieve that is through constraints. is by saying, okay, well, I'm going to limit some attribute of my work. If that's the time, if that's the space, if that's the tools, I'm going to limit them, and that's going to force me to do something that I'm not normally going to do, that not everybody else is going to do. And what I've also found that's been interesting is sometimes the constraints can be a top bound. Say I only have a certain number of characters to work with here. I only work on this for 30 seconds at a time, whatever the works in your universe. But they also can work as a lower bound, which I found to be really interesting. Sometimes the constraint could be saying, hey, I got to design an advertisement. But you know what? I'm going to design 100 advertisements. I can't just do 10. I have to do 100, or I have to do 100 taglines, 100 product names, just enough that you're going to do the easy stuff in the beginning, the stuff that's the normal kind of creative grooves. But eventually, sometimes if you have to get to that 100, it's going to push you so far out into that creative unknown that you're well past the things that you've done before. You're well past the easy stuff. Now you're getting into the weird stuff. And that's where you're going to start to find some of that magic.
That is really cool. And I want to ask, how is there a way that you go about choosing which of those types of constraints you're going to use? Because I mean, that if you're bought into this, I am, because I know it works. How do you choose which constraints are most effective for some kind of project you're working on?
I mean, it will depend 100% on you individually, and also what type of project you're working on. But I will say that the commonality has to be that it's a medium pressure. So if if a constraint has too high of a pressure, let's say you have a deadline, and the deadline is tomorrow for writing a whole proposal or something. Well, you know what? That sucks. I have no time. I can't go write something interesting. I can't go think creatively on something. I just have to get it done. It's going to be templates and copy and paste and whatever. Alternatively, if the pressure's too lax and the deadline is in a year, well, you know, that's not my problem. That's future Ben's problem. He can go deal with that. It's the medium pressure that is the magic sauce for this.
Awesome. Speaking of constraints, we are going to take a 2-minute short break here on the show. You're listening to the Exitology Unlock Your Profits, Unlock Your Potential show here on the International Business Growth Radio Network. We'll see you after this short break.